Yea, and Minus Celsius and other libertines spake against the Holy Ghost. So why shall you judge a false teacher, and a heretic to be accursed? Should you reject and avoid him, and deny him lodging? For he is not a thief, a robber, or a murderer, nor sins he against the light of nature, nor is he seduced by Satan, but to be pitied. Yea, he is innocent and godly, and so pious, that ere he sin against the word and his own conscience, he had rather be forsaken, cast out of our houses, and so not to be rebuked, contrary to Titus 1 verse 13. Celsius. By plucking up must be meant killing, as in barb wither when plucked up by the roots, but when one is excommunicated, he dies not. Answer. Plucking up is a metaphor, and when an heretic is pulled out of the gates and courts of the Lord's house, the church of God, and cast out of the society of the godly, and cursed by them, Galatians 1 verse 8, and they pray against him, and in faith avoid him, and all fellowship with him, he must ecclesiastically die and wither, if God's ordinance be not blessed to recover him. And plucking up is as well a removing of him out of that condition and place as any other thing. By the field Christ understands the world. Celsius saith, the whole is put for the part, the world in which that seed of the word of the gospel is sown, and that is the church. For the gospel is but herein a small part of the world. But when did Christ sow the good seed of the gospel first? Happily, when Christ himself first preached the gospel, or rather, when the old impostor Satan first deceived our first parents. But if so, then the serpent did not immediately after sow tares. For they were long ago sown, and the seed was then grown into rank, growing corn. And there was no need of his sowing, but of his further mannering of it. But this seed is sown with every new act of preaching of the gospel. For this parable cannot agree to the parable of the draw net, in which there be both good and ill fishes. Now good and ill fish had their first breeding in the water since the beginning. Nor agreeth it for the same cause with the parable of wheat and chaff, which hath ever been in the world, whereas the tares are sown upon a new occasion of preaching the gospel. Answer. There be nothing here but vain and forced conjectures. Christ expounds the wheat of the children of the kingdom, Celsius of the doctrine of the gospel. Christ makes the field the world, Celsius makes the field the church. And when he hath fancied these dreams, contrary to Christ's exposition, he goes to the time when the gospel was first preached, which hath nothing to do with the text. For when God made men good, Satan came and sowed tares and corrupted them, and turned them into apostates from God. And ever since the beginning of the world, there hath been a mixture of chaff and corn, fishes good and bad, and of the children of God and children of Satan. And the saints must let both grow till harvest. That is, they must not stumble, nor murmur at God, but submit to his wisdom, who will have this mixture till the last separation of men for heaven, and the barn of the great husbandman for hell and the furnace, in which all things that offend are cast. Number 2. For the time of sowing wheat and tares, it hath been from the beginning since there was a field, that is a world, and the parable that speaks of sowing wheat, and the envious man's sowing of tares immediately after, is but borrowed from men, as the sleeping of a husbandman, which may as soon prove that he that watcheth over Israel doth both slumber and sleep, and that the sowing of tares and of the sons of Satan in the world is as much without the foreknowledge, counsel, and providence of God, as the husbandman is ignorant of his enemy's sowing of tares in his field when he is in a deep sleep, as it may, if all the joints of the text be thus squeezed to blood. It can prove that heretics are to be tolerated, and that only tares are sown when the husbandman sleeps, in regard that Satan sows wicked men and corrupteth them, deciding against the decree and irresistible will of God. Nor does the text here that, nor does the text bear that, with every new sowing of wheat, there goeth the immediate following sowing of heresies and tares, which, though it may have a truth in it, yet it hath no ground from this text, and Celsius shall never prove it, nor any libertine for him. Celsius. If long ago the city into which a false prophet fled was to be burnt with fire, cattle and all, and if angels killed many thousands at once, why doth not God by angels now kill many and destroy them, city and cattle? And if sins under the gospel be more heinous, and God not a whit meeker to sinners under the gospel than under the law, and if the punishment of the magistrate must grow as the sins grow more heinous, why? Then as false prophets were but stoned of old, papists and others do well to burn them quicker with a slow fire. For the more light and grace we have under the gospel, the more heinous the sin is, and the punishment must be more than death now, else Christ's death hath made God milder, not to men, but more severe, and only meeker toward the walls of the town, the cattle, the spoil. Answer. If it be called sly to Munster, and gather a number of robbers into him, and upon pretext of conscience kill and destroy, and if that city will join with him and defend such bloody heretics, we think under the New Testament sadder punishment is due to him, because the sin is more heinous, and the false prophet so flying to a city is not only a false prophet, but a public robbing murderer. And the punishment should be greater, as the Lord augments punishment for greater sins, as is clear from Hebrews 2, verses 1 and 2. So should his deputy, the magistrate, do, and no doubt the Lord slayeth millions of more. And the destroying angel of both pestilence and sword now, as manifestly never such documents of saddest divine vengeance was seen on a city in the Old Testament, as was to be seen in the city of Jerusalem, by the sword of Titus Vespasian, because they had slain the heir Christ. But papists burning of men quick, because they adhere to the truth of Christ, proves nothing, and we think a Julian now deserves a rougher death at the hands of men than any seducer or blasphemer under the Old Testament, and however men with their wit think Servetus got more than heaped justice, because he was burnt for probabilities and niceties, I doubt not, but men void of the zeal of God, if they had lived when the son of the Egyptian was stoned, and Baal's priests and the idolaters in Exodus 32, who both acknowledged Jehovah that brought them out of Egypt and the Scriptures and 10 Commandments, which then were killed, would say the same. And many did say the same very things, that they say now of wicked Servetus. But they but judge of sin, and measure divine justice with their own yard.